At Tracks and Tackle, we've always said one thing, and that's hunt your hunt any way you want to do it. You want to go chase whitetails with a bow or sit in a blind in the early morning with your family? You want to go run public land or chase birds with your... We all know there's no one singular way to go out and get the job done. So that's why we at Tracks and Tackle are excited to bring you the Hunt Your Hunt line of shirts, hoodies, and hats. Real gear for real people. Up early, out late, run in the woods, run in the water. Bringing outdoors back to what it should be. Respect for each other, respect for the hunt, respect for nature, and respect for everybody's choice to do it the way that they choose to do it. Tracksandtackle.com. Check it out. All the gear that you need, plus every penny from every purchase goes right back into the show so that we can keep the stories and the traditions coming your way. Show us some love. Tracksandtackle.com.
I think it makes the property worse when you have habitat, because you're hunting it wrong and you train the deer. You tell all the deer, hey, there's early successional browse and food plots here. There's also a lot of hunting smell, so it's going to become a nighttime property.
Hey, hunting family, welcome back to the Tracks and Tackle podcast. We got a full house tonight with, I got the Bookman brothers with me tonight, Chris from 3B and Josh from 3B. How you guys doing tonight?
What's up, dude? Pumped to be here.
Howdy, boys.
It's gonna be a good night because we're bringing back a friend of the show, Mitchell Shirk from the Pennsylvania Woodsman podcast. Mitchell's another PA guy like myself, and he's actually had Chris and I both on to his podcast, and we'll talk a little bit about that. But Mitchell, you got a specific background that we're going to talk about tonight. Why don't you just give a background on who you are and sort of your expertise?
Yeah, sure. Thanks, guys, again for having me back. I grew up southeastern Pennsylvania, still live in southeast Pennsylvania, not too far from Cabela's in Hamburg. Actually I went to school at Hamburg. But anyway, I grew up, basically walking and talking hunting. Some people learn it later in life. I've been fortunate enough that, it was I guess, transferred over from birth. And I had a lot of really cool hunting influence in my family on both sides, and took me under the wing in a lot of cases. One of them in particular was my uncle. He and I shared a mutual passion for deer, and against his will, I think a lot of time when I was a young kid, he was having me stay over at his house and taking me with for stuff. My dad hunts and still hunts, but never. My dad would rather be golfing in early October than he would going chasing deer. But my uncle and I kind of saw eye to eye in that, and he took me under his wing. He had some land, and I cut my teeth when I was. Before I was driving, somebody would have to take me up and drop me off and stuff. But I cut my teeth hunting and then learning how to manipulate the landscape for better hunting. And it started off as, learning the hard way. There was a lot of failure. As I got into high school and into college, I started diving into the books behind it. The whole reason I went to college, when I was 18 years old, I was a knucklehead and I had no parts and interest of, further education. But what kept me there was somebody said, "What do you like?" And I said, "I like deer hunting." "Well, how about a degree in biology?" So literally the reason I have a college degree is because I wanted to do something with wildlife. But no, that kind of sparked it, and that gave me more knowledge about vegetation, plant and animal interactions, and it snowballed into some pretty cool experiences and successes, and it's been a blessing.
Yeah, none of us are going to fault you with taking a growth pattern because you love deer hunting. So yeah. I think we can all relate to you. Our audience is, primarily, like we're a PA/Maryland podcast, and the terrain varies pretty significantly from Maryland, where you get down towards the bay and it's flat, to some of the northern and even western parts of Pennsylvania. So let's talk terrain, and then we can segment into the topic here for tonight, which is going to be like how to master that terrain. Or I'm not sure how you just framed it up, but learning it. One of the things you said is, I learned a lot of things the hard way. And, for me, somebody can tell me how to do something the right way, and it doesn't necessarily always stick. But if I do it the wrong way once and I have to do it a second time, I'm going to learn from it. So just talk to me a little bit about that terrain, learning to read the land, and then how that applies.
I grew up mostly hunting mountains, and mountains in Pennsylvania is a diverse term.
Right.
You got the, Pennsylvania across the central part of the state is ridge, valley, ridge, valley, ridge, valley. You go up the mountain and down into the farm country until you get to the next one. And I grew up hunting on some of those mountain ridges. So oak, hickory, deciduous forests, rocky ground, laurel, some invasive species, but that seems to be getting worse here more recently than when I first started. But I cut my teeth on that. And then I also, since I'm 12 years old, I have a cabin in north central Pennsylvania, and that's bigger woods. Where my cabin sits on the south side, there's 55,000 acres of state forest land. On the north side, there's 65,000 acres, and it's just big, monotonous, mostly beech, birch, maple type timber. Got cherries mixed in there and stuff. Every now and then you get to some oak points and stuff, but a lot bigger woods. Little bit of mixes. You get those steep mountainsides with thick laurel and big hollows, and then you get into some of the stuff that's like borderline, like the Allegheny Plateau stuff, where it's more rolling and gradual. So, I grew up. That's what I've hunted since I'm 12. But the first half of hunting, and I still do, has been a lot of that central to southeastern oak and mountain, Ridge Valley mountains. Never really got to hunt farm country. I feel every time I do, it's like a little spoiled vacation. I'm not used to it, but that's what I cut my teeth doing for deer.
Yeah, anything that's different, anytime you get to hunt a new area, a new spot, even if it's familiar. I was just telling my wife and some of the guys here recently, I've done a little traveling this summer, and I got to spend a little bit of time out west, and it was awesome. It's beautiful. The United States is beautiful, but there's no place like Penn's Woods. When I think of home, I'm thinking these mature forests and those hips and valleys and everything that you just described.
Yeah, absolutely. That's home to me. I love new places too, but somewhere in the mountains, and the mountains again are a diverse range. When you get into, the western half of the Susquehanna River, and you get into some of that real big stuff, man, you get into some big, nasty hollows and thick, nasty laurel rhododendron. I cut my teeth bear hunting on that since I'm 12 years old. That's in my blood. But, I do love those open hardwoods of beech, birch, maple, and rolling stuff. I love hunting the ridge valleys, and some of these places are loaded with deer, and it's you sometimes you wouldn't think it's loaded with deer just because it's tough the way the visibility is. They can catch you, and if you're not careful with your access, they'll smell you. The wind swirls in the mountain like crazy. It's never doing what it says on a weather forecast. So even though there's tons of deer, sometimes if you do it wrong, you're not seeing much, and you think, "What the heck am I doing?" And that's just home.
Yeah.
Well, Mitchell, we brought you on. You have a really cool podcast, and it's pretty educational. I think we're kind of at that age where a lot of us are into that. You want to hear stories, but you also want to learn something. So we're bringing you on here, and we're going to kind of piggyback off an episode that you actually just did. And it was funny because I came up with this. I said, let's come up with a scenario. And you said, well, I just actually physically just had this happen. So walk us through some steps, and you can use what you actually just did, but you got a new piece of property. How are you going to plan that for getting deer how you want, getting it how you want, just all the steps? You're starting fresh.
It's yeah, that's a big loaded question. I basically just start walking. I just want to walk and just see what I got. What do I have terrain wise? Where do I have access wise? What part of the property does it come from? What's the visibility like? What's the terrain like from the sense of how I think the wind's going to go. Of course, you're looking for deer sign. I'm looking at plant species makeup a lot of the time. Do I have mass crops for the fall? Do I have early successional habitat? Do I have, mountain laurel? Do I have invasives? Is there an invasive problem? Sometimes you look through it in a different lens when you think about how to manipulate it versus just how you'd hunt it. Because when you show up to a place, I don't know how you guys do, but like if I go to a place that I'm not going to manipulate, I'm not going to take a chainsaw, I'm not going to take a tractor or a dozer or something like that. I'm walking the property to the point where I hopefully can understand it from what the sign lays, and I'm just going to go hunt the best spots on the right wind. If I'm doing something that it's property you own and can manage and manipulate for better hunting, then it's a little bit different for me. And I'm looking at all those pieces of what it is. How can I keep the deer doing what they're doing so they feel comfortable, maybe make it better? Or how do I change it? Maybe I need to change it in order to be successful. There's a lot of layers. I think we've overcomplicated habitat. I think we've overcomplicated hunting. That's a pretty big tangent that we could go down. But like, I just feel so often because, everybody in this group here is excited about hunting, right? And you love to talk about it. And when you get into the world of social media and YouTube and stuff, like, the people who are passionate about it, they want to do something with it. I'm speaking from my own personal experience and what I've learned. Like, I started this podcast thinking, man, I could see this as an opportunity, and maybe I could do this more for a living. Well, when you do that, you start to try to have the gold ticket, the coin. You coin something, you make it special. You got to have that extra special thing because you're trying to draw attraction, so you get hopefully content, and people want to buy your quote unquote product. And there's nothing wrong with that. There's a lot of really, really smart hunters out there and really smart habitat designers and how they plant stuff. But the reality of it is, deer need to have food. They need to have security. And those are the biggest things you need when it comes to seeing them go to the, all that stuff they talk about, the next age class, the age and the quality racks and this and that. That's all true. But I try to keep it as simple, even though I do get into detail, but I try to keep it simple. My hunting, if I can, when I look at a spot in this property I just walked, I'm sure we'll talk about, I did pick a couple stand sites for them to put, but I gave them an area and said, look, I would give as much to the deer as I possibly could in habitat. Here's the areas I would access. And this is your guidelines. If you can get in the stand, get out of the stand, and sit on the stand, and the deer don't see you, hear you, or smell you, hunt it. That's the criteria. And if at any one in time when you're approaching the stand, while you're on stand and the wind's swirling, or you're leaving, if that consistently is not the case, you need to change something. And that's just the motto I've had for hunting and habitat. I just try to hunt smart and make as much habitat as possible and diversity.
It's funny that you said like overcomplicated, because I think that's what it is. And it's funny that you said the first thing you're going to do is walk. I remember reading or watching this thing about a survival video, and this guy was trapped on an island and he freaked out and he did all this crazy technical stuff. But what he didn't do was walk around and realize there was a hotel a mile on the other side of this hill, right? So sometimes that's what you just have to do, is just see what's going on and break it down to the simplest thing, right? So
Absolutely.
I'll hang my hat on that one. So
let me interject here, guys, with a question. And this is just me thinking, how do I apply these type of things to the land that we hunt? I hunt a piece of land that we butt up against state forest land, but the property that we have, it doesn't have food. Mm-hmm. It doesn't have water. It's a travel corridor, right? There's a funnel that runs through it. And so we see deer on the regular, but there's nothing there to hold them, and I really don't know what to do on that land other than, we get off of the property that we own and we hunt the state, or, certain times a year, you hunt those funnels because they're going to pay off, so in a situation like that, would that be your advice? Just, get off that spot if it's not the hot spot and you can't do much with the habitat there because it's not offering what you need. And if you have other property adjacent to that, just, go get on that and find a better location.
Yeah, I'm trying to think of how I want to answer your question, to be honest with you, Ron. So one part of your question when I was thinking about this, you were talking about what do you do like if you're struggling to figure out what to do if you want to change something habitat. Well, the first thing you need to do if you're going to go down the rabbit hole of trying to manipulate habitat for hunting, you really need to do an evaluation of do you need to change how you're hunting the property when you start implementing this. So you talked about the property as a good travel corridor through, one piece of land that you can't hunt to another and this and that, and you're in between. I have seen this from personal experience. When you start to attract deer, and if you don't hunt it appropriately, meaning at some point in time the deer are seeing you, hearing you, or smelling you on your approach, your timing, or you're leaving, I think it makes the property worse when you have habitat because you're hunting it wrong and you train the deer. This
Blow
is
them
a
out.
night. Exactly. You train them that, yeah, there's food here, but there's also hunting pressure here. So you tell all the deer, hey, there's early successional browse and food plots here. There's also a lot of hunting smell, so it's going to become a nighttime property. So that's one thing that was going through my mind. But I mean, to me, food is king. I mean, I am not a great rut hunter. I've shot some bucks in the rut. I enjoy hunting the rut in certain places, but I'm not a good rut hunter. And the reason I'm not a good rut hunter is because I've built up shooting them in October when it's around food or the pre-rut. But the pre-rut, when they're just starting to check does and stuff, what are the doe doing? They're not going into heat, maybe one or two here and there, but they're still on a bed to food pattern, and it makes a buck dumb, and you can kill it on food sources or relating to food sources. So food is king. I mean, when you think about our hunting season in Pennsylvania, let's take out the extended seasons. Let's just look at Pennsylvania's statewide hunting season. Archery starts the first Saturday closest to October, and late season ends like the third weekend in January. You've got I'm going to say 2 weeks, maybe 3. I'm going to say 2 weeks where food is not as important in that whole entire multi-month frame. So to me, food is king. So when you go back to what are you going to do on a property, if you can access it and create more food and hunt relating to food, food is king. Food brings deer, and sometimes that food can also act as security, but that's another topic.
That's what you asked Ron, him and I have talked about this a lot. I'm very key on finding oak trees. I'm very key on hunting over acorns, because like you said, food is king. A couple weeks a year, they're not interested in eating. Food is king. They're always going to be milling around. They're always going to be trying to find something to eat. And you ask Ron and Chris and these guys, I have a couple stands on the properties that we hunt, and they're in the thick, heavy oak stands because I know that the deer are going to come back through there. So
that's your best. 100%. That's your best available food source that they're going to. Let's face it, when acorns start dropping, I mean, that's like you're dropping Hershey's Kisses in the woods, and they just go for them. I mean, I have literally sat on food plots that I've said this for years. If Pennsylvania's statewide archery season started 2 weeks sooner, when the extended seasons open in that second to third week in September, there are a lot of years that if it did that, I and people I hunt with would already be tagged out. And it's because they're honestly, I think they're so predictable in September on green food sources. And then if you have a good acorn crop and the weather switch in and you get an acorn drop, you can still kill them. I've killed a couple of deer or been part of a couple of mature deer shot the first 10 days of October. But that said, I think based on cameras and observations, I think it starts to dampen off a little bit just because I think the food sources are shifting a little bit.
Yeah, for sure.
Let's fast forward a little bit before Josh takes us into this next part. But like how we grew up, our grandfather that was a big time deer hunter, old redneck, didn't graduate. I think what did he go to 6th grade, Josh?
Yeah, he went to school to 6th grade. Yeah.
Got into farming. And was just a voracious reader, read everything he could about farming, had always had bumper crops, literally the definition of that on his farms. So much so that he was asked to go talk at University of Maryland because his crop was always good, right? And he felt like he shouldn't do that. But one thing that he did for deer was, Josh will tell you this, is he would always, when he gutted a deer, he's cutting that stomach open and see what they're eating, right? Now in Maryland, we can hunt over, you say bait or corn, whatever you want to do it. He would leave corn up for him too. But he's also seen what else, where the acorns at, because we have rolling ridges and hardwoods, we're at the base of what you guys are getting into in Pennsylvania where we
Yep.
hunt. It's starting to get there. It's not the mountains yet, but we have hills, valleys, ebbs and flows of all that stuff. So do you do that at all? Is that something that you do, or is that just an old redneck thing our grandfather did?
No, absolutely. Especially when I hunt public land or places where I'm not doing habitat stuff. When I'm honestly, when I do habitat stuff, your traditional scouting for sign, what's the latest food source and scouting, I honestly get lazy. I don't do that on private land when I've manipulated things the way I want it to go throughout a season, provide, season long food. But that doesn't mean I don't want to know what they're eating, right? Like I'll give you an example. Property I hunted that we did habitat work on, there's certain times or certain places I'd shoot deer, and the majority of the time I'd shoot a doe. Didn't matter what available food source there was. I'd cut her paunch open and there'd be mountain laurel in it. I swear, if there's mountain laurel, a doe is going to eat it. Buck, sometimes I think they eat it too. Don't get me wrong, but for some reason I see doe have mountain laurel in their stomach in October, November, and December all the time. So yeah, that's fantastic information to know. But I mean, what I want to know hunting a piece of public or hunting a piece of private that I can't do something to is a little bit different than if I'm trying to manage a piece of property for habitat and hunting, if that makes sense.
Yeah, for sure.
Josh,
all right,
do the next part.
Yeah. So this is where it gets into the stuff that I love. So you got this new piece of property. I don't know if you're going to manipulate it at all, or if you're going to try to put in food plots. Just hypothetically, if you were, what are you looking for? How are you selecting a plot of land that you've decided you're going to till, you're going to put in clovers or turnips or whatever it is you're going to plant in this area? How are you selecting that spot?
That's really hard to describe in a podcast. I'm going to go back to simple concepts, and then I'll try to get into an example. I can even talk about this one that I just did with somebody. So one of the flaws I think in managing properties is and this was a concept that came years ago. It's not a bad concept. I just think it's instituted wrong. Sanctuaries. Somebody takes a property. Let's say you got a 100-acre property, and somebody's like, all right, I'm going to take that central 20 acres of my property, and that's my sanctuary. I'm never going to go in there and this and that. And I, in my opinion, that's wrong. I've done that. And yeah, deer know it's safe there. But there's a missed opportunity to create a bigger sanctuary. Let's face it, a deer's daily life and home range is a lot bigger than 100 acres. So I want them, if I'm hunting 100 acres, I want to figure out on that property how much of that property can I give to them that they don't see, hear, or smell people from about September 1 until the end of season in January. And if I can do that, I am looking for pinch points, bottlenecks, ambush spots, whether sometimes it's interior, but I'm looking for those places to kill them. And then I build around that. So if I can have a place that I can put a food plot and I can get in, get out, and move the deer to this place and feed them, I'm going to do it. But if I'm one of the things I don't often do, some places I have, is put a food plot in the middle and have all the deer from the outside go to the inside. And how do you hunt it? It's kind of hard and tricky to move and walk in. It all depends on the property setup. That's why I say it's really, really hard to describe in a podcast. But I look at the way the property sets up. I worry about hunting it. Like when I build a food plot, I am picking the stand first before I ever clear any vegetation. That's the most important thing. If you're doing a box blind, that's easier, but I build it around the ambush points. And then from there, as much as I can give to the deer, maximum food, maximum cover, and getting rid of invasives.
What is like a good bumper cover crop for somebody to try if they're, I don't know, say you got a couple 100 yards you can clear out? Got some good soil, you got some good water, got some good moisture retention. What do you think is a good bumper crop for somebody to try out?
Anything with a deer on a bag, right?
I'm just saying our area. So technically, if we're getting into the horticulture side of things, we're in zone 6-7 is where we are. Ha ha ha, kids. Right. See, he got it. He gets it. So Maryland's more in zone 7. Pennsylvania is a little bit more in zone 6, which just relates to cold temperature of crops and stuff like that. Mostly what you guys can handle, we can handle the same. So that's pretty much why I'm asking. Are you going with something like a clover? Are you going with something, like a different, like a Timothy grass or something like that?
Yeah. So there's not a wrong answer to this. That there's some of this, in my opinion, is art. I look at it to say, what can I plant that's going to last as long as possible throughout the season? I love brassicas, but I can't tell you how many times I planted brassicas and had nothing to hunt by the end of October because they just wiped them out and there was nothing with them. Perfectly honest with you, the only monoculture for food plots that I like is perennial clover. I think perennial clover is really, really hard to beat in A, its attractiveness, and B, its ability to withstand browse pressure. But that said, I have done any food plot combination concoction you can mix up and try to go all agronomist farmer on stuff. And I got to a point where I'm like, I'm wasting way too much time and making this too complicated. So I've resulted to multi-species, cool season, annual food plots. I don't really worry about planting in springtime. I still do at times. There is a benefit to the soil, and that's something I don't need to get into. A lot of other people can talk about that. For me, the most important thing is volume and diversity through the fall. So I love multi-species blends that have a grass component, that grass being a cereal grain like triticale, wheat, maybe a little bit of cereal rye, has some clovers in it, a couple different species, has different brassica blends, and that could be kale, radishes, turnips, collards, you name it. And the list kind of goes on from there. There's a lot of great seed companies out there that produce those. If you have the seeding ratios wrong, one will compete with the other, but if you have stuff in balance, they work really, really well. Disclaimer, I'm fortunate enough to work with Vitalize. They have a mix that does that, but there's a lot of other ones. Green cover seed is another common one people will hear about and do. And a lot of these other food plot companies have stepped up their game in competition and made some of their own blends, and they're actually really, really good. So I do like the concept of multi-species and running from that in fall annual plots. But I would say fall annual plots like that and perennial clover is usually the things I find myself planting most frequently.
Let me jump in real quick, Josh. As you're talking about this stuff, we got people listening right now. I know this is going to come out in a week or two from where we're at. We're in end of July here. What's something people could be like, hey, I just got this piece of property. Is there something now you can just throw out there, easy maintenance, that's going to help you out through this year? Or are we kind of getting to that 10-yard line where maybe it's not going to work out as well?
No, you absolutely can. Poor man food plots is what everybody calls them, right? You get a place and you step onto it August 1st and it's got a meadow, or maybe you clear an opening or something. You still have a lot of time to plant food plots. So a couple ways I've done that. Let's just go in and say there's an old overgrown pasture, right? And it's got all that Japanese autumn olive, honeysuckle, whatever junk in it, and you take a front end loader or you take a chainsaw and cut a bunch of that, make a nice clearing. You got a lot of bare dirt. Man, you can broadcast brassicas into that. You can broadcast oats. You can broadcast annual clovers, even perennial clovers. Perennial clovers aren't going to get established with a lot of biomass, but fall plantings of perennials do fantastic. I prefer planting perennials in the fall over the spring, if I'm being perfectly honest, but there's a lot of seeds you can basically throw on the ground. And if you do a cultipacker or you take a drag of some sort behind a lawnmower, an ATV, I've just took a piece of chain, put some wood on it and, have some weight and drag it across the dirt. And rain, that's the biggest thing. You throw seed out on top of the ground. If you don't get rain, you're screwed. That's why my food plots the last year or two in August have sucked, because we haven't got any rain in August. And I just didn't have great food plots. But if you've got decent rain, you can broadcast that, and you can even go one further. Maybe you got a meadow and it's got some grass and it's got some goldenrod and stuff like that. I have broadcasted food plot seed right into that, sprayed it with glyphosate to kill it, and then after about an hour after I sprayed it, I mowed it with a lawnmower and let all that thatch lay on top of the seed. It's not pitch perfect, but I tell you what, it can make a good food plot if it's done timely with a rainfall. And all you did was broadcast seed and mow. So there's a lot of options that you can do with that. But to answer your question, Chris, you could do a multi-species blend like that. In my opinion, I think you're spending a little bit more money for a startup like that than it's probably worth. You're probably not going to get the benefit out of some of those seeds, and you're paying a premium for that multi-species blend. In those cases, man, I am all about just keeping it simple. Wheat, oats, annual clovers like crimson, berseem, balança, that'll get you a pretty good food plot to get started, especially as a bow hunter.
Okay. We're trying to jump into this because where we live in Maryland, we've always hunted around, standing corn, freshly cut corn or soybeans. Our grandfather, when he was alive, would leave standing strips of corn. Plus there's rolling hard timbers like you're talking about. So if our dad ever listened to an episode, Josh, this is the one, because he gets on us every year. We got to go till, we got to go do all this stuff. And what I'm hearing is you don't have to do that. Get a good broadcast out there. I think we got some good spots. Josh, jump in, but.
Well, no. I'm just along the lines of what you're saying. Our farm, and we've talked about this for a long time, has been part of these like reforestation programs, but I don't know why, but due to something, the one half of our farm is leaving that program this year. So our dad has been talking to us more this year about trying to figure out how to do food plots and stuff. But we can't do anything with it until after September. So this is more of a 2027 thing.
Right.
It seems like, but I mean, this is all great information. This is why I'm like super into this. So like, we also have spots, and let me just get your advice about something else. We have spots in our area that lay very wet. Is there anything that's better for those areas as opposed to anything else? Or is that one of those things that if we're going to try to change the landscape, is that something we should try to make more of like a watering hole or something like that? Because we have natural spring heads that pop up through, the skunk cabbage areas, stuff like that. So is that areas like that, are they even worth trying to manipulate in your opinion?
Sometimes. I think it really depends on how wet. I mean, are we talking consistently wet land, or is it a place that every now and then it gets a heavy rain, it sits a little bit wetter in a low land? That's tough. I've seen people, you can plant some annual species and do okay with wet feet. Perennial stuff, I don't really like doing like alfalfa and clover in those wet feet situations. They just die out quicker. You could plant annuals, and sometimes they're successful and sometimes they're dud. I mean, the biggest thing when it comes to planting food plots is you got to have sunlight, and you got to have oxygen, and you got to have water. And a lot of people think about water and sunlight. They don't think about oxygen. And you can get an anaerobic environment, and those seeds and roots, they're going to die out because they're sitting too wet. So sometimes, and I don't know how to explain how I would. I think it depends on the plant species makeup. You get into skunk cabbage places, a lot of time that's swampy, too wet. Like I'm not. You're gonna get more pieces of equipment stuck and swear and say more four-letter words than it's worth your time. But I mean, some places that get wet and bottoms and stuff, I have planted some food plots and do okay with. You mentioned water holes. So I had this property I went to and helped the guy. It was a unique situation. It was not far from where I live, and I looked at it when it was for sale, didn't have the finances to buy it. The guy that bought it just so happened to be somebody who went to church with a guy whose property I walked, and told him about who I was and where I was, and get on the property, and there's a dozer there. And here, the guy that owned the dozer that he hired to do some road work for him owned the property 2 people before that. So it's this really weird connection of all the people that, who knows who. But anyway, I get to the property, and he says to me, he said, we did do some habitat work and excitement. He said, and I want you to tell me your opinions of it. And one of the things they did was they dug water holes. And I talked about this on the last episode I just did. I don't think water holes are habitat improvements. You can make the case they are, but most of the time, when I'm digging a hole and filling it with water or putting a tub in it so it holds water, that's not making a big difference in the world of habitat and wildlife benefit. I'm putting that at a strategic place so I could shoot something. That's a hunting improvement. So I think there's situations I like to use water. If you have water and you're not changing it, maybe you can hunt it and relate to it. When I set water holes up, I like to do it. I don't know how you describe this area. The crude word I would say is just a staging area close to bedding. I love to have dry bedding where maybe you, like this property that we did, there was a ridge, and from this ridge north, we have these clear cuts planned, and we're going to oriented in a way that we're going to get hopefully woody browse, early succession generation throughout this property in these clear cuts, right? And we're doing, instead of like a big 10-acre clear cut, we're doing a 3/4 of an acre to an acre and a quarter clear cut here, and then a space and some clear cuts. And I'm orienting the trails down towards where we have food below. But it just so happens that there's a location I can access walking up the hill, and the hill covers my approach. I can get in a tree without the deer seeing me over there, and I put a water hole 15 yards in front of that tree, those trees I picked a tree stand for. And it's like the perfect situation where any north wind, a buck during the rut can cruise that bottom of the bedding area, and it's like right in front of their face. There's a water hole there. And I've just found that when you put it at the right place, close to dry bedding, they use it. Or in the same case, if it's a dry bedding area like that, and it's in proximity to bedding, and they're going to get up and filter towards a green food source you put down, if there's a water hole along the way, a lot of times they stop, especially in hot weather. So that's how I've used them. But I do think if you just go willy-nilly putting water holes around, they're kind of useless, if in my opinion. I think you got to think about what's the limiting resource and how would I use this to better my hunting.
Yeah, strategic placement versus, the random, throw it and get against the wall and see what sticks.
Right.
So I'm sitting here, I'm listening to all this. I'm taking it all in. I'm learning. I'm listening to all three of you guys talk about this. The question that goes into my mind is, how small is too small to bother? So yeah, some guys, they have the land to cultivate, and other guys, they don't. Right. So at what point is too little? Property that I've hunted in the past, like we've put down small patches and stuff, and it just gets decimated before it can really get established. Right. So, from any of you guys' perspective, but, certainly I'd love to hear what you'd think about this, Mitchell. Like, how small is too small to even bother, putting down some clover or some buckwheat or something like that, just to get them to come in and have something to eat?
I think when you ask that question, I think about one of the things that I've heard you guys say a number of times, and that's hunt your hunt. And I think it comes down to, it depends what your goals are.
Right.
Like if your goals are to feed the neighborhood deer, bring in deer, have them season long and wide, you need some acreage. This property I just walked was a 48-acre property, and there was a section that we could clear out that was going to be between 3 and 4 acres for a food plot. And that sounds like a lot, and it is a big food plot. In my opinion, the knowledge of that property, the surrounding area and the size of it, 4 acres is not going to be enough food, and just green food plots to feed the deer and make a big difference. We got to supplement a lot of other ways with food, and we're going to do that with maybe some mass crop plantings, and a chainsaw is the biggest thing for making food. But when you're talking about having a place to steer deer movement and shoot deer at certain times of the year, man, I've shot deer in food plots, or been part of some that were literally like smaller than the size of my pool deck out here. Like I'll never forget, a buddy of mine helped this older fella, and literally all he had was a rake and a chainsaw, and he just made this real tiny little food plot. And you looked at it and you're like, that was a waste of my time. The old guy shot like 2 or 3 deer off it, and he was so ecstatic. Happy as could be. This was the greatest thing ever. He wanted to sit on this food plot all the time and shoot deer. So if you can steer deer movement and put a food plot there and shoot deer off it, that's awesome. I mean, I shot the biggest buck of my life on a property that was 1.5 acres, and I had a little rinky-dink food plot there. And was it the food plot? I think there was more to it, but I mean, you can have a little food plot and do cool stuff.
Yeah, so it sounds to me like it's in the results, and you couldn't have answered the question any better, because we do tell everybody, like, hunt it your way, so whatever your goal is what you're setting out to do. If it's going to improve your odds and it's going to get you to what you're aiming towards, go after it and chase it.
Now, if somebody comes to me and says, I made a 1/4 acre food plot and I made a major habitat improvement and changed the scape of my landscape on my property in the surrounding area, I'm probably going to call bullshit, in my opinion. But that doesn't mean it was a waste. It's still something of valuable, and it was still fun to do, and it's part of the process. So it just comes down to the definition of what you're trying to do.
Right on. You guys want to talk about trees?
Yeah, so transition to that, and this is where, my interest gets piqued again. I told you before this, my vernacular's kind of a little bit out of date with it, but like shifting from food plots to trees, are you ever going to add trees? Are you going to, the big thing back in the day, Josh, our dad's done like fruit trees. You're going to plant fruit trees? Are you going to try to reforest this? Are you going to, is there too much of a good thing? What are you looking at for that type of thing?
Yeah, so I think one of the things that's important to me is knowing what you got. I mean, if I have a canvas that has something I can work with, I'm just going to try to promote certain species and maybe get rid of other species. If I got a property where it's all what I'm going to call junk, we might be talking about potentially restoration. I've never been a big tree planter for the majority of time up until recently, because I've finally, I'll be openly admit the reason I wasn't a big tree planter is because I was never any good at it, and I didn't take the time to truly take care of them, see them get their max potential. Then I did a couple and, actually had success by accident and learned, and had some people who are smarter than me share about that. And I've started to see how that can be a tool in the toolbox. The best time to plant a tree is last year or the year before that. The next best time is now. The problem I have is most of the time on the properties I've been a part of, planting trees is not the answer. Most of the time it's cutting down trees and getting rid of vegetation. And I want to get that done first before I worry about planting trees. Well, if it takes you 5 years to get the property set up, you lost 5 years in those trees growing and getting a mass crop. So it's a catch-22 in a lot of senses. But to me, it's what do you have? What do you want to promote? And what are your goals with the trees? Are you looking for producing mass crop? Are you looking for producing, early successional growth? And the list goes on there. Soft mass, I think, is awesome. My opinion, soft mass belongs at pinch points, bottlenecks, strategic locations to kill deer. I don't like the idea of a big soft mass tree plot that's going to be hard, at least as a bow hunter. I mean, if you're hunting a place with late drops and you can touch them with a rifle, I mean, that's a different story. But if you're talking about setting a property up for bow hunting, which is what I find myself doing for myself and other people, I like to put soft mass in clusters where I can shoot to them with my bow. So on the food plot, leading to a food plot, little tree plots and stuff like that. But I don't want to have it somewhere where I can't kill them.
So like I said before, I like to hunt the oak trees and stuff. And you've been talking a lot about the beech trees and the birch trees. Is there anything like long term, like if you were going to plant trees that you could be like, okay, I know I need to space these trees out X amount of feet so that they actually have the potential to grow and block the, clear the ground up, underneath their canopies and stuff. Is there anything like that you're specifically trying to get into? I know, like down on our farm, the birch trees do great because it does lay wet. Some of the oak trees do really well, but like our red oaks and our white oaks, they do way better up on the hills and stuff where they can stay a little more drier. They get more of the runoff. So is there anything like that you're looking for? Or if you're going to plant trees, what kind of trees are you going to plant right off the bat?
Yeah, so I'll give you the example of the one I just did here and finished up this week. So one of the things they told me when they had me out there is that they really enjoy planting trees, and they did it on their other property and were very successful at it. So I kept that in my mind, and when I set this property up, I told you about there was like a 3 to 4 acre section that we could have a green food source. We're going to strategically put some clusters of soft mass trees on that food plot to hopefully have, 3, maybe 4 stand locations to hunt on the food plot with soft mass. Now, on the back side of it, there was areas that if you would have asked me what I do with this maybe 10 years ago, I just said, we got to get a dozer in here. We got to keep extending the food plot. But what I've learned recently and what this landowners suggested was they like trees. So what I'm going to do, this area, there was a lot of tulip poplar, yellow birch. There was some black gum in there, some oak. Keep in mind, the one thing about this 50-acre piece, it was high graded. Probably 20, 30 years ago. They took the best Timber Valley trees, cut them down, and left the rest. And what's left is a jumbled mess of, there's tulip poplar, yellow birch, really, really crappy oak trees that'll produce nuts, but they're never really going to amount to much as far as timber. Black gum, assorted maples, a little bit of white pine. So there was some diversity as far as those trees. But what I did in this one section, it was another 4-acre chunk, and it was a lot more birch and poplar. I told him, I said, look, let's reduce the canopy by about 50 to 75%. Let's cut some of these non-desirable trees. The species I wanted to cut down, the tulip poplars, the yellow birches, the black gums. And I tell you what, I am not afraid to cut down oak trees. I know that makes people cringe, but there are some oak trees that are jagged and twisted and getting out-competed by the tree next to it. And in my opinion, if that's the case, when it's 30, 40 years old, it's probably never going to amount to something I want. I'm better off starting over, and I'll cut it down. I have no problem with that. So we'll cut down 50 to 70% of the canopy. I wanted them to orient the cuttings in a manner that they would pile the trees up a little bit. I don't want to have slash everywhere so you can't even walk through it. So orient it in a way that you can manipulate through it. And then there's your opportunity to plant trees. You know, you've got those openings, you've got those places to create a tree plot. And it might take 5, 10, 15, 20 years, but he's got the sunlight, he's got the right drainage, and he's manipulated the overstory to get sunlight. So in that case, I said, look, I think hard mass is the way to go. And in that case, I just say diversity. The more diversity you can get, the better. You know, if you can, there's so many different varieties of trees out there, and I'm not even that well versed in them, but you can get multi-length drop trees from September through December, and there's different species of oaks. You know, one species of oak that it's technically, it's a non-native oak, and people wrinkle their nose up, but it produces quick and produces a lot, as a sawtooth oak. So I told him, I said, chestnuts, sawtooth oaks, native oak species, just get hard mass here to change the seed bank. And in 15 years, hopefully we've got tons of hard mass that's dropping in October and September. It's going to supplement the food. It's going to add more food to this area. And the other thing too is, if in that time you continue to manage the other plants in that area, cutting back the regeneration of woody saplings, which is going to be the tulip poplar and yellow birch. Those are always the first things in my area that come back with vengeance, and you got to keep after them. If you keep after them and get those trees established, now you've got early succession pockets amidst a grove of hard mass production trees. You know, is it going to be easy to hunt in that 4-acre square? No, but you can hunt transitions, and that's where I talked about the green food plots, the food sources, the water holes, to make pinch points where they're going to go from one, move to the next. The goal is to have them move, but have them stay on your property in daylight before they leave.
Yeah. Right on. Let me bring this thing full circle. This is an amazing conversation, and certainly we appreciate your take on this and your expertise, Mitchell. If I had to recap what I've heard at a very high level, you know, since we started the conversation, I would say, you know, if I'm just Daryl that just bought a piece of land and I don't know, I've never done this before, I'm going to walk the land, right? I'm going to choose those stand locations. I'm going to build plots around the locations where, you know, we're targeting our stands. And then ideally it's as simple as being able to get in, get out undetected, right?
Yeah, I mean, I think that's a pretty good summarization. I mean, like I said, sometimes the best thing you can do is not it's when you get a new piece, you're excited and you want I want to do the moon. I mean, I'm gonna make food plots, and I'm gonna cut down trees, and I'm going to hinge cut trees. That's a whole other topic of discussion. But they're going to do all this stuff, and sometimes you don't think to plan through. Sometimes the best thing to do it is walk it what are the deer doing? Maybe hunt it for a year or two without any improvements. Understand what they're doing naturally. And sometimes what they're doing naturally, you can already incorporate, and it's like icing to the cake. Now, there are times like this property that I was at, there are sections on the exterior of the property, right on the property line, that has the thickest cover. And I'm not opposed to having thick cover on the edge. The problem is the previous generation, the property was kind of used and abused. There was trails going in and out from neighboring properties. There's tree stands on every border. There was old tree stands there that people were on. So in that case, I actually took the property line. I told them, I said, you really need to get this surveyed. Make sure you got concrete borders. Establish yourself in the neighborhood and say, look, you take your property seriously. I know it sucks. You got to be the jerk, but you take this seriously and you want to make sure the investment you make into this property is worthwhile. So once he's got his borders established, posts his lines, takes care of it and has a perimeter road that he can maintain that, I actually, to start making your habitat improvements about 50 yards in from your property line. Now, I've made habitat improvements right up to a property line, but in this case, I wanted to change the deer movement and make them, instead of walking the edge of the property, I wanted to centralize some of those improvements so it changed the behavior of how they moved. And if they go from the bedding in the central area, which is going to take a little bit of time, we have some ideas of how to make that happen, but they're going to move through centrally. And it might shorten your property up. If your property's 48 acres, I think I mapped this out. I mapped out about 6 to 7 acres that I say, this is like your area where you're going to drive your truck, your four-wheeler. He wants to build a cabin. This is where your access is going to be. I want no habitat improvements. This is nothing for the deer. And I mapped out the other section that was about 23 acres of usable space. We're going to maximize as much habitat as this as possible. The remaining landscape, I said, it's kind of like a gray area. There's going to be hunting opportunity there. I don't know what the neighborhood pressure is going to be like. Maybe we can extend that deer habitat. Maybe we got to make sure it doesn't turn into better deer habitat, because I don't want to create something for the neighbors to reap off of. I know that sounds selfish, but I don't want to make it. I don't want to make it and point my habitat improvements right towards the neighbor's stand and let him, reap the benefits of my rewards. Yeah, everybody's going to shoot deer, and I have no problem with that, but I don't invest the money and my time for
this isn't socialist deer hunting.
I like that way. I like that. I'm going to use that.
You can. Yeah. Give me credit the first time. After that, it's free. It's yours.
Yeah. Well, I think, like I said, the biggest takeaway from all this is kind of keep it simple. You can do more, but keeping it simple is the best and easy way to do it. And
yeah. I'd say, just, reflecting on the conversation and reflecting on everything that you guys have brought to the table here tonight. This is what being a woodsman, this is a difference between being a woodsman and just, being a hunter. It's going out, it's being able to read the land, understand, let that property speak to you, and, maximize your opportunities on it. Mitchell, Pennsylvania Woodsman podcast. Where can people find you?
I think anywhere you download a podcast. I'm assuming. I don't do all that dropping and stuff, but yeah, Spotify, iTunes, Google Play. I'm part of the Sportsman's Empire podcast network, so that's another place to get the RSS feed. The socials, I try to keep up with that, even though I'm terrible. Pennsylvania Woodsman podcast for Facebook and Instagram. And I tell everybody the best way to reach me is send me an email. pawoodsmanpodcast@gmail.com. Yeah, that's the best way to get a hold of me and follow along with what we do. And I just leave you with, I might have sounded like I know everything. I feel like the more I learn, the less I know. I mean, I'm learning constantly, and I really don't feel like I am that well versed in a lot of this stuff. I've just formulated some opinions over the years and learned some stuff the hard way and try to learn and transition all the time. There's a lot of really, really smart people out there. And the reason I'm saying all this is because there's more than one way to skin the cat. My way is not necessarily the way or the right way. And I tried to lay that out with some of the places I've gone, is try to give what you can to the deer, try to make good habitat, focus on everything below your wingspan. But how you hunt it, man, that's your prerogative. If you keep it simple, and like I said, I just started using that that train of thought of the whole axis thing. Can't see, hear, or smell, going to, coming from. If you have that logic, you're probably going to be able to figure it out. And man, I've learned some pretty cool hunting tactics from other people and things I didn't think of. So with that, I think it sparks innovation, right?
Yeah, we can learn from, I mean, every single person we encounter they're capable of teaching us something if we're capable of learning.
That's right.
So I'll leave it with that. Appreciate you coming on, hanging out with us. Appreciate you being part of the Tracks and Tackle collaborative group. And Josh, Chris, until next time, man.
Yeah.
I'll just tell everybody out there, like always, stay wild, get outdoors, and remember, nature is your playground.